The only competitive advantage I think you really have in an organization is your relationship with your customer. Anything you offer, any product, any service, it can be replaced with technology. It could be replaced with new ideas. It could be replaced by a company who copies your technologies at a lower cost or more features. But nobody has your relationship with your customers. So when you think about that as a constant, then the question is, what do you offer your customers? How do you keep that relationship with your customers as you move forward? And part of that in the cybersecurity world are things like trust and transparency and helping them think about how to be secure and helping them understand that you are really looking out for them as well as you when you look out for you, and maybe helping them find ways to be more secure.
Welcome to Tools for Tech Leaders, a podcast for C-suite executives and tech decision makers. I'm your host, Ian Tan, CEO and co-founder of Mattermost, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Keri Pearlson, Principal Research Scientist at MIT. So this is a world that we live in today where cyber threats are accelerating. Company leaders need to understand the risks and responsibilities and different approaches in the world today. And Dr. Pearlson educates top executives about cybersecurity and has incredible insights about how to bring leaders into this world that we're all living in today. So Keri, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Ian. Glad to be here.
So Keri, you've had an incredible journey from systems analyst at Hughes Aircraft to being one of the leading cybersecurity researchers at MIT. Just curious, how did it start? How did you set on this career path?
Well, I'd like to say it was planned, but it's probably more serendipitous than anything. I took a job with Hughes Aircraft Company right out of my undergrad program at Stanford many years ago. I was a systems analyst. I actually was in a program where I rotated around Hughes and visited different offices and then settled down in one office where we were looking at how to build telecommunication systems. So really very far afield from where I am today. I'd like to say that it was planned that I would end up in cybersecurity, let's just say X number of years later. But it was more of a more interesting jobs just kept coming my way. And I took different jobs that didn't seem to have any connection. And then all of a sudden I was in this position here at MIT. I have a doctorate in information systems from Harvard. And when I was at Harvard, I had a professor from MIT, Professor Stuart Madnick, on my thesis committee. I had worked for Stuart in a previous capacity, and I thought he was a brilliant man, so I wanted to continue to learn from him. So I asked him to be on my committee, and he was, and that gave me a connection into MIT and some of the insights into things they were doing. Then years later, Stuart and I were chatting about something, and he's like, I need an executive director for my research group at MIT. And I'm like, well, I don't know very much about cyber. And he's like, no problem. You know a lot about working with executives and executives in the tech field and executives who need to be knowledgeable participants in the tech field. So that was sort of the opportunity. Come in, learn about cybersecurity, and apply much of the learnings that I had along the way working with senior executives who needed to interface with technology and technology people who needed to interface with executives.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I was lucky enough to go to, I went to business school on the West Coast in the middle of Silicon Valley. And it's like, well, where is the cyber program there? So it's really interesting that number one, you've got the cyber in the business school at MIT, and that it's sort of like a full functioning sort of center. And I'm just kind of curious, can you just tell us more about the mission of CAMS, cybersecurity at MIT Sloan, and what it's like to work there and what are the things that you work on?
So when I first started MIT, I joined this group called the Interdisciplinary Consortium for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. That was the name of our group. And it was that name because those initials spell IC, OIC. In other words, IC cubed. And it's very hard to tell that joke. Professor Madnick's excellent at telling that, but I was never very good at saying IC cubed and what it stood for. In fact, it took me years to be able to say it in one breath. So along the way, as I became the executive director and got more into the role, I realized that the cybersecurity issues we were studying weren't really just for critical infrastructure companies. It was all companies. And frankly, with the Department of Homeland Security's definition of critical infrastructure, there were many more industries than what you would normally think of. It was banks, it was hospitals, it was transportation. It wasn't just utilities and energy companies and gas and oil. So we changed our name to CAMS, Cybersecurity at MIT Sloan. It turns out that's not quite a very good name either, because now people think when they want to sell cybersecurity products to MIT Sloan, they should go to cybersecurity at MIT Sloan. Of course, we're not buying their products, we're researching their products. But the name CAMS has stuck, and it does really exemplify who we are. We're looking at cybersecurity through the lens of business, business issues. So our goal here at CAMS is really to look at the organizational, managerial, strategic, governance, risk management, all of those really hairy, difficult questions that are really related to how our companies can be more cyber secure, as I like to say, cyber resilient. And it doesn't mean technology is not important or not included. Technology is in our name. We're MIT. So we take a technology perspective on everything we do. But the big problems we want to research and we want to solve are the problems around the management of cybersecurity and the leadership and the strategy. What's the board's role? How do we manage risk, the risk that is associated with cybersecurity? How do we handle that really, gnarly problem of human risk and the people in our organization? Those are the kind of things that we look at.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm super curious, being in the business school, what's that journey like from organizations where they think, oh, cybersecurity, that's a technical piece, to organizations as they mature and realizing, wow, this is actually a business problem, organizational problem. And we have to put structures in place so we can be more cybersecure and cyber resilient. What's that journey like?
So I think that's really kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure that there's like a journey where they go from a technology perspective to an organizational perspective. I think there's more like problems to be solved, and the technology is just not doing enough. So the fact that we don't see more cybersecurity incidences happening in our organizations is really testament to how great the technology is and how great our technology people are. But the fact that we keep seeing new ideas, new ways in, new vulnerabilities, particularly through our people, makes it clear that the technology just can't do enough. And so then managers start to search for what are the other solutions we might have. And that's where they start to venture into the organizational side of cybersecurity. So that's from the protection or resilience side. When we get to the management piece, I think I've seen a progression in my career. I started out working with CIOs. And when I started working with CIOs, they weren't called CIOs, they were called data processing managers. And they were relegated to a cage in an organization that was glassed, high floors, lots of cables running underneath it, extra air conditioning. They were really in a separate world in a business. Many of you will relate to that. I'm sure, Ian, you've seen data centers like that. And over the years, I noticed that CIOs emerged and they became business people who knew technology, not just technologists who were brilliant technology people. And technology became more and more integrated into the organization. We now talk about digital transformation and we talk about strategic advantage from our technology. I don't think there's a company today that could exist without technology, but it took a while to get there. There were companies who really could exist without computers. They were manufacturing something or they had paper systems that they were using. Today, that's not the case. Cybersecurity is kind of taking that same evolution in my mind. We're kind of in the middle of all that. So CISOs, many of them are brilliant cybersecurity people. Many of them have incredible cybersecurity backgrounds, but they're now being asked to do more business-oriented functions, whether that's talk to customers about the cybersecurity implementations that their company has, or talk to their boards about how to manage risk, or even talk to their C-level executives, their C-level colleagues about why cybersecurity should be something important for them. So we're seeing that kind of same progression as cybersecurity becomes even more important for the success, and I mean the strategic success of organizations. It's more than just a technology problem because it impacts our business in ways that are more than just calling for technology solutions.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And just kind of go back to something you mentioned, you got for sort of data processing to IT to technology as strategic advantage. We're in this world of cybersecurity now with CISOs. And you also mentioned about cyber resilience as this sort of differentiated from sort of the core security. And what's that world like? And what's the sort of latest thinking about that frame?
So, many organizations invest in, I mean, in fact, every organization I've talked to invests in some way in protecting their organization from cyber incidences. So that means putting in firewalls, putting in malware detection tools, putting in identity and access management tools. The thought process is, how do we keep the bad guys out? And protections are really important. In fact, if you think about one of the most standard models that we talk about in cybersecurity, the NIST framework from the National Institute of Standards and Technologies in the US government, it has 5 categories. It has identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Protect is number 2. It's the second category. It's the second thing you would do as you're building your cybersecurity strategy. But it turns out that we still have lots of headlines of cyber incidences. We still see lots of vulnerabilities that we hadn't anticipated. Our protections are only as good as what they're designed to do. Now, maybe AI will change some of the paradigms here, but up until now, the protection tools are excellent at what they're designed to do. They protect our access or to manage our penetration testing tools. But that's not enough. We're still seeing breaches. So my thinking is, if the tools just can't protect us enough, you can't be 100% protected by your cyber tools or any tools, then what's the alternative? We need another way to think about this, and that's where resilience comes in. I think companies that are cyber resilient are companies that think a little differently about how they're going to manage the cyber world in their work in their company. For example, they're going to invest in all the protections that they can, but they're also going to invest in those last 2 buckets of the NIST model, the respond and recover. And that means that they're going to set up processes, they're going to practice, they're going to do all sorts of activities, which I'm happy to dive into if you like, some of the ones I've seen. But I think the idea is a different mindset. One mindset is keep the bad guys out. The other mindset, the resilience mindset, is well, we got to keep the bad guys out, but they might still get in. What do we have to put in place so that we have as little damage as possible? We're back up to speed as quickly as possible. We have no damage to our reputation, on and on and on, all the negative things we see from a cyber breach. And it's this idea of resilience that I think is more of a managerial perspective and a way that non-cyber executives can start to think about how they can play a role in helping their companies not be affected by a cyber incident.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'd love to dive into like what are those practices and what are those sort of exercises. So if you're, let's say you're a new CEO coming in and you're taking over a company and you're the new leadership, what are the things you think about to say, hey, are we actually cyber resilient ready? Are we prepared? What are some of the tools that you might use coming into a new organization? Just like, hey, let me just evaluate this and see where we are.
So if you're new coming into a new organization, and maybe even if you've been in the organization for a while, the question to ask is exactly that. How resilient would we be to a cyber incident? And of course, there's lots of cyber incidents. There's not one vanilla cyber incident. And I've talked a lot about this at the board level, building which we can get into also later if you'd like. But I think the question is, what happen if we had a cyber incident? Where would we start to see the damage? And now let's build in whatever we need to build in, not just to protect and keep the bad guys out, but to recover from the damage. So, for example, every company has business continuity plans. I don't know a single company, maybe they haven't written them down, but everybody's kind of thought about what happens if there's a tornado or a hurricane or a physical issue in our environment and we can't come to work. COVID was a great equalizer on that. What happens when nobody can come into the office? So everybody understands you have to have business continuity plans. But what happens when you put your business continuity plans on your computer and then your computers are locked up by a cyber incident? All of a sudden, you've got these great plans, but nobody can execute them because they can't get to them. So if you haven't tested your business continuity plans in the hypothetical cyber incident, you might be caught in a situation where you have great plans, but you can't do them, and therefore you're vulnerable. You're not resilient. So, one tool that I've seen companies put in place is tabletop exercises or fire drills, where they actually take their organization through a hypothetical cyber incident, and they don't just talk about it. They actually put themselves in the middle of it. They get the emotional feeling, the reaction of what happens if we have a ransomware attack. And we're going to pretend we're going to have one, and we're going to talk through exactly how we're going to do it. Now, what that does is a couple things. One, it starts to build these muscles for responding. You're probably never going to experience exactly what you practiced. However, you're going to have muscles in place for responding and recovering that you wouldn't have if you didn't do the practice. Second of all, it might point out something that would be a problem in a real incident, like for example, my story about the company who had their continuity plans on their computer. If you haven't thought about the fact that you might not be able to access your computer in a cyber incident, therefore not be able to do your recover get access your recovery plans, then you clearly aren't resilient. Third of all, if your plan is to reach people over email and emails are down because the system is being ransom, you need another communication plan. What's your communication plan for reaching out to people? So if you're looking at the resiliency of your organization, there are a number of different ways you could look at it. You can practice with tabletop exercises. You can review your communications plan with a cyber incident in mind. You can do things like look at your other business processes and think about or practice or try to respond to how would they work if there was a cyber incident, if your systems were locked up, if there was a ransomware going on, if your backups were corrupted. All of those things that would happen in a cyber incident, you want to hypothetically have happen and practice and see what you would do about them. And the more closely you can come to replicating a real cyber incident in your organization without, of course, all the damage, the more likely you are to build the response in your people, in your processes, and maybe even in your technologies that you wouldn't normally have thought about. So that's one way that I see companies being resilient.
That totally makes sense. When you're running these tabletop exercises, you're having all these findings. If you had sort of like a pie chart, what are the sort of like biggest slices that like, oh gosh, right? Like the incident response plan was in a Word doc in like a SharePoint site that we can't access because SharePoint is like part of the breach. Like, what are the most common ones that you kind of see in terms of like, hey, this kind of happens. Like you might find, one of these.
I'm not sure I can give you a pie chart, Ian, but I can tell you that the areas that I've been writing about, one is about your communication plans. Critical cyber communications is very different than critical business issue communications for just the reasons we're talking about. The method might not be workable. There's an urgency around your communication plans that you don't often have with other crisis. Cyber crisis has an urgency about it. Stakeholders need to know something, and in the absence of what you tell them, they're going to conjure up other things. You could have unintended consequences from what you say or what you don't say based on the cyber incident and how you play it out. So there's legal consequences. All of these things are really almost unintended consequences from even trying to do the right thing. So thinking through your communication, your cyber communications plans is something really important. And we've written about that over here at CAMS. Another piece is this practice that we just talked about, doing a tabletop exercise, not just with your executives, but with all the players that would be involved. So one thing I've seen happen, if there's a cyber incident, many companies think they have companies on call that will come in and fix it for them or come in and do a forensics for them. That's not necessarily going to happen during a real cyber incident if you haven't built those pathways in a practice or in a tabletop exercise or in a fire drill. Contractual arrangements are important, but what happens if the cyber incident hits everyone in your city or everyone in your industry? That's a unique factor for a cyber incident that might be different from other kinds of emergencies, in which case you may not be the first company that gets the resources that you think you're going to get, even though you have a contract. It's a tough choice for the vendor. So thinking through, do you have your vendors in place? Lots of people talk about relationships with law enforcement. Here in the United States, it would be FBI or perhaps your local law enforcement. Almost every large city has a cyber group in their local law enforcement agencies. Do you have a relationship with them? Do you even know who to call? 911 is not the right answer when you're in the middle of a cyber incident. So building those relationships ahead of time with your local FBI office, with your local law enforcement offices, perhaps your police, that would be really important to have also. And finally, I think your customers, thinking about your stakeholders. A project I'm currently working on is one about building post-incident trust. And I'd be happy to tell you more about that project if you're interested. But we're right in the middle of that. I don't have a lot of findings to share with you yet. But the problem is this. Um, when you have a big cyber incident, your customers are naturally, of course, affected by it. And some cases you can't help it, and some cases maybe you could help it. But thinking about once you've had an incident, how do you rebuild that trust with your customers is something lots of companies face, and any company's had a cyber incident has to face. And so I've had the luxury of thinking about this problem and some access to some very high profile companies who have had incidences in the recent past. And I'm studying what do they do? How do they build trust or rebuild trust post incident? I can tell you in one case that the aha idea was not it's not that you can't build trust post incident, but it's a lot easier to build trust post incident if you've already built the trust pre incident. So, what can you put in place before or right now? Again, thinking about this resiliency umbrella, what can you put in place right now so that you have the mechanisms in place to call upon should there be an incident because you've already built that trust with your key customers or perhaps you're a regulated entity with your key stakeholders so that you know exactly what you have to do and when you have to do it. Not because it's regulated, but because it's the right thing to do to manage the trust relationship that you have with your stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. I'd love to jump into that, but just kind of summarize, make sure it's a summarize. I thought it was super interesting the way you frame things. And it's almost like cyber resilience is kind of like fire safety. You have to do drills. You have to know where to go in an emergency. You have to like take the school kids and put them out and be like, this is the gathering spot. And that really makes sense. And you're talking about, hey, there's a post-incident, sort of playbook that just kind of assumes in the world of cyber resilience, you just have to assume there's an incident. You have to assume there's a fire. And what are you doing pre-incident? Building out, channels to the cyber organizations, whether it's FBI or local municipality, making sure your vendors are in place, making sure your plans are available outside of your core system so you can kind of reach them, especially communications. Then, however the incident happens, however you simulate it, you've got to do that post-incident trust. So that is super interesting. Is that an appropriate way to frame it in terms of like to an executive?
You summarize it very well. So I would say resilience is sort of an overarching concept, and there are multiple different pieces that are hanging under it, at least in my mind right now. I may at some point, or somebody else may come up with a better way to pull them all together. But to me, being cyber resilient means thinking about your processes and, of course, the other components of your organization with the thought in mind that there might be an incident and what do we have to do so that we can be back in operations really quickly. I mean, I paint this hypothetical picture. Wouldn't it be awesome if we had a cyber incident and nothing happened? We didn't have any damage to our reputation. We didn't lose any money. We didn't lose any systems. We didn't mess up any of our customers' supply chains or any of our regulation requirements. Of course, that's probably not the case today. But if we don't put that vision out there, we're never going to achieve that kind of result. So suppose we had a cyber incident and nothing happened. That would be a very resilient company in my mind.
Yeah, 100%. Like at work at Mattermost, what we do is we work a lot of national security and defense, and there's actually this directive from the DoD CIO's office that says, you want to have zero trust, so that when you actually have a breach of the outer system, you reduce lateral movement. So they're in, but they can't do anything because you have different sort of controls in place. And then by the time you get them out, exactly as you said, like you have that isolation. So I'm just kind of curious in your world, when you think about the policies or the approaches of exactly what you said, you have the incident, but you really don't have, the sort of damages or effects. What does that look like? What is what is sort of like the role models for other organizations, and how do they get to that resilience where you have an incident and recoveries, and you actually don't have that much to recover from?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I haven't really done a lot of deep research in that area. My gut feeling is there's certainly technologies to put in place, like zero trust technologies, like multi-factor authentication, like identity and access management tools that don't allow bad guys once they're in your systems to jump from one system to another system. We see this all the time. Poor hygiene is probably the number one reason why the bad guys can be so successful. So if you're going to start somewhere technically, I'd start with your hygiene. What is it you need to have in place? But you're not going to get to the answer of the question of how do you be resilient if you ask the question, how do we protect ourselves? You're going to get to the question of resilience by saying, okay, suppose bad guy got into our system, or a malicious actor got into our system. What damage could they do, and how do we make sure that that damage isn't possible? So it's not they got in and let's protect them from getting in the first place. We want to do that, but we want to say a different question. We want to ask the question, what's our biggest risk? What's our biggest technological risk, and how is that going to play out, and what can we do put in place now so that we're managing that risk? So sometimes you're not going to, I mean, maybe even all the time right now, you're not going to be able to be 100% resilient. But if you haven't even stopped to ask the questions of what's the biggest risk from a cyber incident and what are we doing about it, then you're not going to come at the answers that you need at the managerial level of understanding what to invest in so that you can build those recovery and response mechanisms in place.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of curious on this world of sort of educating business leaders on cyber resilience. Are there sort of like go-to stories that you might start out a class with or examples? The one I think about is like, oh, there's some organization, they're like, oh, you'll never get into this. You can do the simulation. You'll never penetrate our testing. And the security consultant goes out in the parking lot and drops a bunch of USB keys labeled like home videos. And, and they just like, they get all over the system because people plug them into their work machines because they're wondering what's on the USB stick. I'm wondering, are there examples of stories that you tell at MIT that just kind of grab the attention of these business leaders and like, oh,
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, some of them we've already talked about, like the one where your business recovery plan is on your computer, or the one where you have a communications situation and you haven't practiced what kinds of communications you would have in place. Oftentimes, I find what grabs the attention of executives the most is a tabletop exercise in their environment where you put them through the simulation of a cyber incident and let them feel, not just hear, what the issues are. Put them on the spot and make them make decisions on the spot in a safe environment. And then all of a sudden they realize that, of course, there are questions that they don't have an answer to. And then the lesson isn't, here's the answer. The lesson is, okay, we've got to go find an answer to this. This is a hole in your planning system. This is a hole in the way you've designed your organizations. I believe for most organizations right now, there's probably not a vanilla answer to how do you be resilient. I think many companies have invested in different parts of the puzzle. And again, I'm not quite sure what the whole puzzle looks like right now. I'm still, every time when I got on my post-incident response project, that was another topic. I'm like, oh yeah, this would be something that would be resilient. So I keep uncovering new puzzle pieces for the complete picture of resilience. But I think putting someone through a tabletop exercise is a good beginning. I think having them talk to somebody who's been through an incident. I notice that at the executive level, when somebody has the personal experience of going through a breach, then their attention is drawn to how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? It's very painful. How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? So talking to somebody who's been through one of those is maybe a second best. It's not quite the same because you don't feel the emotion that that person's feeling, but at least you're talking to someone and you're hearing more than just the articles and the book, the textbook, if you will, about what cybersecurity is and should be. I think all of us know that right now. I don't think there's a person out there that doesn't know that there's cyber vulnerabilities. They just think it's not going to happen to them, or it's not going to happen to their company, or maybe they think they've already invested all they need to invest. And what we need to do is break through from that and say, you might have invested a lot, and that's great. As I said at the beginning of this talk, it's not so much that technologies don't work. The fact that you don't see more breaches means you've done good, but that doesn't mean there won't be one in the future. And let's hope you never have one. But if you did, wouldn't you be sorry that you didn't actually think about it ahead of time when you know you can think about it ahead of time? I think also there's this question of non-cyber leaders really not knowing what questions to ask and not knowing where to start. And so it's easier, the easy path, and it's not easy, but the easy path is to say my technology people will take care of this for me. But the truth is cybersecurity is everybody's issue today. And it from the board of directors all the way down to the lowest level employee. And I think there's a role for every single person to play in an organization. And that's another piece of the resiliency puzzle, is making sure that people in the organization know what they can do and they have the right values, attitudes, and beliefs to do it. So I think that the playbook looks like talking people through not only what others have seen, but having them feel themselves what it might feel like if they had that kind of situation, and then helping them build a roadmap so that they've done everything they can to be prepared to minimize the damage that might occur.
Yeah, 100%. And you talked about the role of governance and of boards. And I'm super curious when you prepare these future business leaders at MIT Sloan for that journey of being on those boards, that emotional connection to a case study or a hero or someone who's been there. Do you have any sort of like, are there any classic sort of business cases, right? Kind of like Porter's Five Forces, low end disruption, sort of like textbook? Because I'm curious, is there a sort of standard sort of framework or, other than this, which is a little bit more technical, but like, what's the emotional story? Is it CrowdStrike? I imagine there's a lot of business cases coming out of that at some point. There's lots of, is it SolarWinds? Like, what are the, what are those sort of like epic, historic, everyone needs to understand this in business school, as they go on their sort of, management and governance journey?
So it's another tough question, Ian. At Sloan, we don't actually have a cybersecurity class or program. So there are a couple of classes that you can take as an MBA or an undergrad where cybersecurity is a topic brought into them, but there's no like MIS class. There's no cybersecurity management class. So the issues in cybersecurity come up either in an elective someone might take or in discussing business risk, financial risk, portfolio management. And so, of course, it's ancillary to the discussion. Frankly, I think that's really realistic for most companies too. I don't think they sit around and they say, let's until they have cyber on their agenda, they don't sit around and say, let's put cyber on our agenda. They have to somehow get it onto their agenda through one of these other mechanisms. Somebody realizes that it's important. Somebody realizes that their friend just went through something. They read a headline. Certainly the headlines help. I do think we have a lot of headline fatigue at this point. I think we only see the newest and the latest, and I mean, somebody like you and perhaps like me are kind of combing. We have searches going on all the time to see what the latest breach is. And the story that people tell is the latest story that people tell. It's unfortunately things like CrowdStrike and SolarWinds right now, but Equifax is still up there. Capital One is still up there. Even the Target one, where the guy got the malicious actor got in through the air conditioning system, is still
Wait,
talked
what?
about.
Sorry. What air
The
conditioning system?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I think it was Target, it might be
Okay.
TJ Maxx, I might be forgetting it, but
Okay.
the one where, it was a repair guy who got into their systems to remotely repair their, air conditioning, I think it was systems, and inadvertently downloaded malware into the company systems. It might have been TJ Maxx, I forget right now, it's such an old case, but it's, those kind of cases those kind of stories that come up in conversation. We do hear things, like some of the old, Stuxnet and some of the more, critical infrastructure kinds of cases, again, depending on your audience. If you're in a manufacturing environment or an operational technology environment, those kind of stories come up. And usually, unfortunately, in the classes that I teach, which are mostly executive classes, there's usually someone in the class who's personally experienced something. So their story counts, and their story probably counts more than any of the examples that I could give because they're not only conveying a situation, but they're conveying their emotional response to the situation and how awful it was and what they did about it and how much time it took and what expense it took. So these personal stories really are effective. But I think there's no, like, standard set of cases that people talk about, and frankly, the NIST model, I mean, you classified it as kind of a technical model. I look at more as a strategy model. I look at it as if you're gonna build a cybersecurity strategy, these are the 5 areas you wanna ask. In fact, I wrote a paper a while back, published it at Harvard Business Review on the 7 questions to ask at your next board meeting. But really what I did is I took the NIST model, my co-author and I looked at the NIST model, and then we came up with 7 questions, 5 areas in the NIST model, 7 questions that really start to raise the discussion about what is it that we're doing and how are we managing cybersecurity. And I think that even though it's written as a more technical model and these are the kind of controls you want to have in place, I think it's an excellent starting point for any manager who or any leader who really just wants to understand what's the question, what's the landscape look like? Because most people think it's protection. And when you look at that model, you realize that it's understanding what are our crown jewels. You know, we can't protect everything the same way. So even with your home, you probably have home insurance in case something happens to your home. You probably have car insurance, but do you have insurance that covers your clothes? I mean, maybe you do. Do you have enough that's going to cover everything that you own? Probably not. So you've made some decisions about what to insure. based on the value to you of that particular item. Well, the same thing happens in bucket one of the NIST model. What in our business do we have to make sure is protected? What do we really need to ensure is resilient? And then it goes from there. So I look at the NIST model as more of a really good framework for non-technical managers to start with.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll definitely check out the 7 questions that boards should ask about cybersecurity. We should include that in the show notes for this. That sounds great. Is there sort of, I mean, there's 7, but like of those 7, are there sort of like 1 or 2 that you kind of like, man, I just wish that they would ask these questions?
Well, so I've actually evolved from that article. I'm happy to share it with your audience here. I have a second article on the balanced scorecard that I
Hmm?
for board cyber resilience, and that one is a little bit different approach. And for that one, I built on some theories that many people will remember of the balanced scorecard for financial reporting. And basically, the takeaway from the original work done by the professors at Harvard was that you can't just look at one indicator, you have to look at multiple different indicators. So, my balanced scorecard for cybersecurity resilience says we want to ask the question, what's the biggest risk we face from cybersecurity and what are we doing about it? And my balanced approach is to ask the question, what's the biggest technology risk? What's the biggest organizational risk? What's the biggest supply chain risk? What's the biggest uh, uh, um, financial risk? And maybe if you have lots of compliance in your industry, what's the biggest compliance risk? Maybe there's another one you want to ask about. But to ask those questions, what's the biggest risk and what are we doing about it? If you're on a board or you're a non-cyber executive, those questions are really relevant. Ask your cyber team or ask your peer group, what's the biggest risk we face from cybersecurity in our organizations or in our operations? And what are we doing about it? And that will spark the questions of how do we build resiliency? Because if there's a risk there, then you want to make sure that there's a way to manage that risk.
Yeah, thank you. And just for our audience, the balanced scorecard, I think, was done a little while ago, balancing, I think, like, hey, how do you measure the output of an organization? You've got financial, you have the customer, you have learning and growth, and you sort of attach it all together in this sort of like, it's not overweighting the lagging or the leading indicators. So it sounds like you're doing that same approach with cyber resilience and saying, hey, what does a balanced scorecard look like? You've got sort of different categories. And when you kind of go down into the scorecard, red, green, yellow, like how do you think about like how do you quantify that? How do you measure it in that framework of actually getting the score out of the balanced scorecard?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The way that I positioned my initial paper was to present the idea of a balanced scorecard and to articulate the different areas like you just went through from the original scorecard. And then I had a quantitative and a qualitative measure in each of those quadrants, if you will. The qualitative measure is what I said, asking the question, what's the biggest risk we face and what are we doing about it? Not just the risk, but what are we doing about it? To me, that's the resilience question. What have we thought about? And you might articulate the risk as a more technical risk. The risk is that the biggest risk we face is unauthorized access to our systems, or the biggest risk we face is our systems going down and we can't manufacture our products anymore. And then the question is, what are we doing about it to manage should that happen? The quantitative one, I rely upon standard types of controls that people put in place. And most organizations have their cyber people have some kind of control framework that they're using. So instead of reinventing the wheel here, my red, yellow, green indicator would be based on whatever the control model is that the organization is using. But the sort of aha moment isn't that there isn't that what the model is, it's the evolution of that model over time. Are we always in the red? Are we seeing some moves up into to the yellow? Are we in the green? Do we feel that we have those controls in place? So the next area of research for the balanced scorecard is really to come up or to look at the quantitative controls that people use and see if there's a more universal version of it. But right now, the way I've articulated it's whatever the control model is or the management maturity model is that the company's using.
Yep, very cool. I'd love to spend just a couple minutes just on sort of stories. I think for our audience that is going to be, sort of the a little bit newer to cybersecurity. It'd be great just to get some stories. Like I'll say, one that I have. Just this is one of my places I work. There was we did M&A. We bought a company. And we went through the checklist, right? And there's like for the application security, do you salt your passwords? And salt passwords means like as you encrypt your password, there's like extra fancy encryption. Do you salt your password? The answer was yes. And then after the acquisition and looking through the source code, this company salted their passwords, did the extra hard encryption, and right next to those encrypted passwords was the passwords in clear text. In case like anyone needed a password reset, they would be able to hand them the actual clear text password. So, that's an example of you've got your controls in place and you have your little checklist, and there's a little bit of a gap. I'm just kind of curious, like any sort of crazy security stories you've heard, like just for folks that are a little new to the security industry. We might have, had these for quite a while, but just kind of curious, any stories that just kind of get the mind going on just like, wow, how far apart some of these resilience goalposts are.
Yeah, so most of my work has been in the human factors side. So I'm sure there are lots of other examples like what you just did, where people have the post-it notes with their passwords written on them, or they pick a password that's so hard for them to remember that they can't remember it, and then they have to write it down somewhere to keep track of it, or they get a password manager and then they forget the password for their password manager, and so that they really mess themselves up because they pick a really hard password when really all they have to pick is a really long password. The computer doesn't know the difference in a 15 character thing that you and I could understand. Our brains parse words pretty quickly versus a 15 character password that is meaningless to us. So one of the stories that I often hear is that I can't remember all my passwords, and they may have a password manager, but then they start to say, wow, well, if I use the same 4-letter password or 6-letter password all the time, why is that a problem? And of course, we can see why that's a problem, because if it's exposed in one place, then likely it would be giving damage or risk in another place. But let me tell you a story about culture, because that's another topic I've done a lot of research on, and I think it might drive home some of the how you can manage some of the human risk. So, another area that I think we've talked a little bit about earlier is this idea of looking at driving cyber secure behaviors. We want everyone in the organization to do the right thing. And the right thing, there's some universal right things, like use passwords, don't put post-it notes up, don't put the English version of the password next to the encrypted I mean, there's some common sense things, and then there are some not so common sense things. But every organization has a list of behaviors that they want their people to do or not do. Most organizations build training classes to tell their people what to do or not to do. Or they do awareness campaigns, really bright, splashy commercials on the computer that remind people it's Cybersecurity Week, so change your password or something along those lines. But it turns out that awareness campaigns, they're good for the first 5 minutes of the awareness, and then people tune them out. And training is really hard to make an impact because it's usually not at the time that the person needs it. You're training them at orientation, you're training them once a year for compliance. You're not training them in the moment that something could possibly happen to them. And you're hoping that they remember when it is. So what my model talks about, what the research I did talks about, is to drive cyber secure behaviors. We really want to set up the right values, attitudes, and beliefs. We want people to believe that it's important for them to spend their time on cybersecurity type things. We want them to have the attitude that they can make a difference and do something about it. And we want them to have the understanding of what to do. So the values, attitudes, and beliefs. The value, it's worth their time. The beliefs that they should do something, and the attitude that they can do something. Once we put that in the middle of the activities and the behaviors, we see all sorts of ways we can change people's behaviors. So, for example, one company wanted to drive home the importance of cybersecurity, and so the CEO of the company started every all hands meeting with a cybersecurity story. Now, a couple things that were interesting to me about this. One, it's a CEO. It's not the cyber guy or girl. It's a CEO. Second of all, if the CEO tells you a story, perhaps a personal story of something he or she saw or read, or even brings in somebody to tell a story, then you know that this is a priority of your executive. And if it's a priority of your executive, it trickles down. It's the priority of their direct reports and so forth and so on. And third of all, by spending 5 minutes on cybersecurity, in this case, he was educating the company on the latest issue thinking of cybersecurity. And again, it's not the cyber person, and it has a bigger impact when it comes from the not from the cyber person. So in that organization, you could see that they were creating values, attitudes, and beliefs, i.e. culture, for cybersecurity behaviors. And in that organization, there were lots of different examples of things that they did. I'll give you another example from another company. Many companies have done this kind of takeaway also. They want people to do the right thing. And one of the right things is if you see something, say something. So they have a badging system. And if you report something, then and you follow, their procedures and you report what you see, you can earn a badge that you can put on your email that talks about you're a cyber guru or a cyber hero or something like that. And you would think people wouldn't want that, but it turns out that they love rewards. So if you can put a reward system in place and it doesn't have to be expensive, how much does a badge cost to put on someone's email? If you can put a reward system in place that would reward people for doing the right behaviors, then you're changing their attitudes, their values, you're making it worth their while to do something. They're more likely to do the right behaviors. So there's a couple stories that I tell when I talk about the human side of cyber and things that people can do to change behaviors. They're very different than training and awareness campaigns. The executives making it a priority, the reward systems, even the punishment systems or the consequences. We know one company where if you click on a phishing email the first time, you're directed to a little training program that tells you not to click on a phishing email and tries to help you recognize what a phishing email looks like. The second time, you have a meeting with your boss. The third time you click on a phishing email, you meet with HR. The fourth time, you're given a final warning. And if you click on it 5 times, you're fired. Well, you're fired. They don't have to fire very many people for people to know that clicking on a phishing email is not a good thing in this environment. Now, a lot of companies say to me, well, we can't fire people for clicking on phishing emails. And I say, okay, that's not the right behavior modification for your organization. But you can see where having consequences to their actions would deter people from doing the behaviors that you don't want them to do. So there's a few stories.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you. I love the cyber heroes with the badges and just doing the right behaviors. I feel like that's something we, as our own company, should just do. That's a fantastic one.
I
I
love you
also like
saying
the
that because that would be awesome if you did it.
yeah, it's sort of bananas not to, right? Like, why not, right? Like, that should almost be like a feature of like, that should be a feature of like, in some sort of your own product, right? Your email signature. That's awesome. Yeah, that's really
Well,
great.
what it takes, Ian, though, is it takes a company who wants to make cybersecurity a broader issue for their whole organization. And quite frankly, many organizations don't do something like that because they think cybersecurity is the domain of the cyber people. They haven't broadened it to the point that it's, anybody in the organization can help and you can encourage them to help. There's certain things that people do really well and there's certain things that computers do really well. And one thing that people do really well is report something that they see to other people and they get heard. And so if that's something you want to encourage, then there's ways to encourage it. So I've seen this a lot because not because it's not a brilliant idea. I didn't invent it. I'm just relaying the story. It's because people don't think that anyone in the organization really should worry about cyber, that we should just put technologies in place to filter out any bad emails that might come in or to flag any emails that might come in. But the truth is that that's not necessarily going to work. The technology solutions are not enough.
Thank you. What brings up to mind is like a mutual friend of ours at that last conference in Geneva, and she was like, "Yes, you expect me to sprinkle my magic cybersecurity dust over all our IT systems," and yeah, I love
Right.
that. It's like, yeah, it's like, oh,
Right.
it's not us. It's the work of the cyber people that will come in and sprinkle like magic cyber dust.
That's right. And
Yeah.
and I actually tried to articulate that a few years ago, looking at the maturity of an organization. And pretty much everybody thinks the technologies will keep us safe. And we all know that's not good enough. We've just talked about a dozen examples of why that's not good enough. Then they think their cyber people will keep them safe. Well, the cyber people help. They can set up policies. They can influence people. Again, people do some things really well. They can influence people, but it's not enough because they don't have control over the whole organization. And frankly, in most organizations, people look at the cyber people differently than they look at a marketing person or a finance person or operations person. They're supposed to do cyber, so we expect to hear them tell us things to do. Then the next level is your manager. If your manager tells you to do something or helps you see why you should do something, you're much more likely to do it. And then, of course, it becomes just ether. The whole culture is one where people say, yes, not only am I here to do the job and to help the company be successful, and if there's a fire in a room, I'm supposed to report it. And if there's a cyber incident or cyber something that looks fishy, I should say, I'll tell someone about it. I should do something about it. I shouldn't just sit back and hope that the right person does the right thing. And when we get to that point, then we started to build an environment where we can use our human expertise and our human assets to really start to combat the cybersecurity issues that we're all seeing today.
Yeah, 100%. That's awesome. There's maybe just kind of so maybe just a couple other questions here, and then I'd love to
Sure.
talk about one other topic. But these I love this concept of like the sort of layers, right? The technology, the people, the management, and all that infrastructure. I'm just kind of curious about sort of like these other sort of obvious at the management level, not so much like longer passwords and things, but like management leaders. One thing at our company we have just agreed to is like we're actually going to do like phishing simulations and regular attacks on ourselves, and I think it's a quarterly basis. So I'm thinking like, well, we should probably just like I should probably just announce that in all hands, right? Like whether it's happening or not, right? There might be it's like a secret shopper. It's like people are going to be
Yeah.
on their best behavior if there's a secret shopper program, and there's going to be a secret like phishing attack simulation that we'll actually be going through ourselves. Um, and actually, most of the phishing attacks are actually my identity, right? People are like, "Oh, Ian is pinging you, and Ian needs like Apple gift cards," or like
Right.
that's probably the most common one. So, are there things like that that as a CEO, as a leader, you'd be like, "Hey, I love that one of all hands telling security stories. For me, it's going to be just letting the company know we're actually going to be doing phishing simulations." Anything else that is kind of like that's just like easy win.
So easy wins. So I love the idea of rewards. I think, and it doesn't have to be just a badge. You could do multiple rewards. I've seen companies give chocolate chip cookies. I usually say cookies, the chocolate chip kind, out when people are when they do the right things. If you have a in the office situation, that's good. I've seen things like gift cards and catalog choice, gifts, things like that. At any kind of reward system drives home the behaviors. I've seen cyber groups brand themselves in some way and then use that branding to convey the message on things like T-shirts and water bottles and other kinds of swag. That's a little bit more costly than perhaps a badge or just starting your all hands meeting. I've seen other things like building in cybersecurity activities to the performance evaluations. So,
Mhm.
if you build in some sort of way for people to be part of their job, like for example, when you're evaluating people, one of the activities that you want to see them do over the quarter, year, whatever your period is to lead a cybersecurity seminar on something that they've seen. It doesn't have to be a deep cybersecurity seminar. It could be a headline, and they bring a discussion up, or any kind of thing that would be useful to spark people's ideas and to get them involved. Sometimes we see people who train other people take on the characteristics of what they're training even more deeply. So if I have to train you on cybersecurity awareness or password protection, then I'm more likely to be more committed to it and that kind of thing. I've seen that. One company we talked to, they have a whole volunteer program for they're very big into give back, and so they actually have a reward system for if you do a volunteer thing in a local small business to help them understand phishing or some cybersecurity incidents. Now, they're volunteers in their company. They're not cybersecurity people. They're going out and they're doing community service, but the community service is helping a small or medium enterprise or even a school or some nonprofit understand cybersecurity. Again, they're more engaged because they've now gone and taught it somewhere or given a talk on it somewhere else. And they don't have to be technology experts to do it. All they have to do is tell a few stories about what's going on in their company or talk to that particular company about these kinds of mechanisms. But the more that it becomes commonplace language and discussion and less specialty cybersecurity discussion, the more likely the general person in an organization is to have the right values, attitudes, and beliefs.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. Maybe just one last topic, just like looking ahead. And
Yeah,
one thing I've got two girls, one teen and one tween, and in a decade they're going to be in their 20s, and they'll be thinking about
I'm
jobs
sorry.
and all these things. I know, right? They grow up so fast.
They
So I'm just kind of curious, like in 10 years, like, where do you think that the state of cyber will be? What do you think the jobs are going to be? What do you think the things that they'll need to think about, like in the workforce, the world? Is it about like, hey, AI cloning is going to be 100% and everything is going to be a phishing attack with like perfect resolution? Is it going to be, is it going to be, how different is the world be? Like, what are the big trends you see on that horizon? Like, where's that world in 10 years in cyber resilience?
I think it's really great that you're looking at a 10-year horizon. I think that you're thinking about this through the eyes of your girls is really wonderful. At MIT, we do a program every spring where we look at a 5-year horizon and we say, what does cyber look like 5 years from now and what can we do about it? But I happen to be very lucky that I'm at MIT because we have people here inventing the technologies like quantum, like AI, that are the technologies that will be there in 10 years. They're really at the development stage right now. So to me, I don't think about what's the technology. I'm more thinking about what's the way people interact in the world 10 years from now. And I think that's a big guess at this point. But for me, the one constant I've seen and what I expect in 10 years from now is some the work that needs to be done is part something that technology does very well and part something that people do very well. 10 years ago, we would never have said that we were saying that technology would take over some of the management functions that it just has never taken over. And that's because there's certain features of management functions that people do really well and technology just isn't there. And now we're saying AI might take over some of the management functions. Well, it probably will take over some of the management functions. And we may get to a point where we've trained it so that it takes over some of the what today seem like important decisions, but are less important decisions in the future. But there's still going to be strategy. There's still going to be creativity. There's still going to be interacting with people. And people are always going to do that better than a machine. Machine can do a lot of the interacting with people, but people interact with people in a way that no one else can. I wrote a blog actually probably 20 years ago. I used to do a blog for CIOs about forward-thinking ideas. And I wrote this, my last blog was about the competitive advantage that you get from your relationship with your customers. And I couldn't think of another topic after that, so I stopped the blog after that one. But the point of that blog was the only competitive advantage I think you really have in an organization is your relationship with your customers. Nobody has your relationship with your customers. Anything you offer, any product, any service, it can be replaced with technology. It could be replaced with new ideas. It could be replaced by a company who copies your technologies at a lower cost or more features. But nobody has your relationship with your customers. So when you think about that as a constant, then the question is, what do you offer your customers? How do you keep that relationship with your customers as you move forward? And part of that in the cybersecurity world are things like trust and transparency and helping them think about how to be secure and helping them understand that you are really looking out for them as well as you when you look out for you and maybe helping them find ways to be more secure. But I think there are other ways that your girls will find very exciting and very innovative that we can't even imagine today, 10 years out. I think it's about people, the people side.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Keri. And that does make sense. I was talking to an economics major who's like saying, oh yeah, he wants his daughter to go in economics, not engineering, because he says, well, I want you to be a CEO, not a CTO. And that concept of, that relationship, that sort of business understanding it's so interesting. So Keri, thank you so much. Where can the audience go to learn more about your research and socials and pieces like that?
Thank you for asking that. So, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't publish a lot on LinkedIn, but occasionally I do. The best place to find my work is either to Google my name. A lot of my articles are in the public domain. Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, some academic journals, Sloan Management Review. But all of those are linked. All my cyber work is linked to our CAMS website, and the website is cams.mit.edu. There's a number of different pages there with not just my research, but my colleagues' research in this area. A lot of the articles that we publish in the public domain in the press, a lot of the academic articles, and even a lot of other ancillary documents that might be useful, like one-page research briefs on specific issues like culture or risk management. There's some posters that we've used at meetings that we've had that might be of interest to people, and then some podcasts that we've done. We link those up there. So lots of really good references on cams.mit.edu.
Excellent. Keri, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this content, please join our LinkedIn group. Please thumbs up, please comment, please subscribe. We'd love to bring more of this content to you.